Michael Hart started Project Gutenberg in 1971 with the idea of creating an online library of classical books and documents. This was when the internet was still called ARPANET. His first digital document was the Declaration of Independence, which took great effort to transcribe and render in digital format that could be transmitted over ARPANET. Today we can download a high resolution of the original Declaration of Independence in seconds. No transcription needed. E-books, which were a pipe dream of Michael Hart back in 1971, are now everywhere. This amazing digital transformation is a true hallmark of the 20th century, every bit as profound as Henry Adams' dynamo. The incredible technology advances in recent years but have created this false impression in the minds of many policymakers and in the minds of those on Capitol Hill, the appropriators, who have rushed to embrace the new technology because they think it means cheaper storage, cheaper access, cheaper preservation. I remember when we thought that way about microfilm. Digitizing government records and placing them online seems to take care of the public's need for information and turns loose everyone to be his or her own historian. Who needs the historian? But the truth is, the records of all kind need to be analyzed, studied, placed in context, and explained before they are useful. This is a scholarly process that should not be dismissed in the rush to make raw documents available online. The actual content of a record is more important than the problems of managing them as so many boxes on a shelf or so many terabytes of big data. This requires scholarship, not just records management. Historians need to be part of this decision-making process, and we need to decide what to save as our documentary heritage, what to digitize, and how to present the content of the records. This nation has a long tradition of documentary publications in traditional print form, many fostered and financially supported by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission. Now the pressure is on to seriously change the nature of this scholarly enterprise and convert everything to digital access. Footnotes give way to metadata. Volumes containing alphabetical indexes will give way to global searches. We need to beware of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The baby is scholarship. The bathwater is access. Documents can be thrown up onto the internet, into the great cloud of information, without a thought of what the content is about. Policymakers are not going to sit at their desks, open up a vast universe of documents, and then figure out what they mean, any more than they will come and roam the stacks of the National Archives. School teachers do not need a universe of 1 million pages of the Civil War online. They need 5 documents for today's class, and they want to know which ones are the best ones for the lesson they are teaching. They expect to rely on historical experts to guide them. Journalists are not going to spend months looking into online archives for stories that need to be written about an agency of government when the story is against a deadline and when their story, written for the internet, has a maximum of 800 words. I like the idea of having a vast archive of American history and American government on my desktop or on my Kindle. I want to see it. It will happen. But how will it be created and how will it be accessed? How much will it cost and who is going to pay for it? Today, the projects within government and private sector, these projects are underway to digitize large collections of federal records. Some of them have been pretty well thought out, and they're moving ahead, and I'm all in favor of this. But strikes me as very similar to what we had 30 years ago with the beginnings of Project Gutenberg. To make these online documentary resources useful and accessible to end users, it's going to require scholarly expertise that can be found in the documentary editions of the historical figures in the multi-volume documentary histories on wars, diplomacy, and other topics that have been the hallmark of American historical research for a long, long time. The historical research, analysis, and editorial apparatus necessary to make raw digital records useful will take time and money well beyond the basic cost of placing raw materials online. While some utopians see the future of information as free for everyone, it won't be. It will cost plenty to do it right, but doing it right will be cheaper than doing it wrong. Here's my proposal. The government's responsibility to preserve and make available the records of its work should include permanent, long-range efforts involving federal historians, archivists, curators, and academic historians to determine the records of most value in telling the story of the various components of the federal government. It should be the job of government to require the equivalent of multi-volume studies, in print, online, or both, of the history of each agency that are based on the actual records of the agency. These should be carefully researched, properly annotated, and contain sufficient metadata to make them searchable and accessible online. When I was House historian, I promoted the idea that my office should engage in just such a project, a systematic, fundamental research into the records of the House that are housed at the Center for Legislative Archives under the management of Richard Hunt and his fine staff. We have a scholarly model for Congress in the papers of the first federal Congress, edited by Charlene Bickford and Ken Bowling and others at George Washington University. This long-range project, now nearing completion, has published 20 volumes on the first Congress alone. But I am just as concerned with the records of the other 111 Congresses that have followed. We have nothing comparable for any of these. There is so much more to know about the House and the Senate over the past 223 years because we have not systematically studied the voluminous records. My plan for a highly selective, multi-volume documentary history was finally approved in 1994 by Speaker Tom Foley. Newt Gingrich was elected Speaker, and he had other plans, and the rest is history. What I am suggesting for the federal history community to be even more dynamic in the future and to be even more useful to policymakers and the public is a massive effort that will require the systematic research into existing records, both in paper and digital form. In doing this, we will be in better shape to evaluate the historical value of the records to determine which ones should become part of a growing online resource, and ultimately to make the decisions about which of our documents should be preserved at the highest level. To carry out this plan, we will need more federal historians, archivists, documentary editors. I am not proposing this as a temporary jobs program for historians. That would miss the point, although it's nice. I'm calling for it as an essential long-range plan that will help fulfill the Jeffersonian and Madisonian mandates that it is the duty of government and its citizens to preserve and disseminate good information about the nature of government. Anything less is a disservice to this great experiment that we call the United States of America. I know it's absolutely impossible these days to go up on the Hill in this current climate of stalemate and retrenchment and sell the House and Senate on a new program to preserve and disseminate the records of government. But we need a bold plan if we are going to master the digital age before it buries us. Back during the bicentennial of the United States Constitution, this society, the Society for History and the Federal Government, proposed to the President of the United States that he issue an executive order mandating the establishment of historical programs in every major federal agency that didn't already have a history office. Our proposal included a plan to create a White House history office. In 1991, George H.W. Bush and some of his key members became interested in this plan. we learned that the president was ready to create a history office in the White House, and that he was willing to consider the larger issue of the creation of history programs in all agencies that did not have them. The president planned to take up this issue of the expanded history program after the next election. Unfortunately for our plan, he lost that election, but we came this close. Earlier in our history, when President Franklin Roosevelt discovered how inadequately the government had prepared the history of how we conducted World War I, he issued a memorandum that, by the stroke of a pen, launched the government's modern military history program. It's time for us again to call on the President of the United States to take action necessary to place history programs in all major agencies of the executive branch, and to do so for the entire federal government, what is now being done only in parts of it. I was very proud to be a federal historian working at the House of Representatives. While I am no longer working for government, I continue to study and research Congress and the U.S. Constitution at the Robert C. Byrd Center for Legislative Studies at Shepherd University, about 65 miles from here, along the Potomac River. I am part of a network called the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress, more than 50 members, who are in the business of trying to preserve and research the private papers of former House and Senate leaders. As you know, the private papers of members of Congress are not a part of the official records that are saved by law, the committee records of Congress. And we think these private records tell important stories too. Just last year, the Byrd Center published a 2-volume revision of the classic study, Congress Investigates: A Critical History with Documents, originally edited by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. and a federal historian by the name of Roger Bruns. For our new edition, I was able to bring Roger out of retirement as co-editor of the project, and along with my colleague at the Byrd Center, David Hostetter, we had a grand time working together on this project. It involved the work of current and former federal historians, some academic historians, a journalist, a former CIA agent, the Senate historian, Don Ritchie, one of the original contributors to this series back in the 70s, wrote a new essay on the Army McCarthy hearings, based in part on his editing of the 5-volume closed hearings of Senator McCarthy. There is so much good work going on. It would be even better and more productive if the agencies and the appropriators could realize that a systematic approach to selective but comprehensive editions of the records of government could take us in the right direction, be more cost-effective in the long run, and serve the government and the citizens of this country better. We started out to do this a century ago. I am not nostalgic for the past, but I am eager to learn its lessons and to apply those lessons to the future of the federal history community. My heartiest congratulations to the Society for History in the Federal Government for all you do to provide a network that makes the work of federal historians more efficient and provides a place where we can share our collective experiences about the work of the federal government. Thank you very much.